Hello everyone, welcome back. I just wanted to say thank you to all the great comments and questions that people asked on the last post that I made with the clay sculpting. You have to forgive me, I'm really under the weather at the moment, but I want to push through and finish showing you my workflow, going from clay and then into the computer and working with ZBrush. I take a couple of snapshots, and if you'll notice, these are images of the clay model without the hair and mustache because I want to show what's happening underneath, of course. We will add the hair and everything digitally, so it's not necessary for me to show that part of the clay model here. What I do is I just lay out a couple of JPEGs, and then what I'm going to do is open ZBrush, and then in ZBrush I have the work plane. So first I'm going to select a tool. I'm going to get a basic sphere, edit, make polymesh 3D. I'm going to change my material to maybe a matte cap. That looks good. And I like to start modeling an object. I like to turn on the wireframe, and I like to be able to see the poly paint usually, especially if I'm starting to add different elements to something I'm sculpting. But for right now, the poly groups are not really important. What is important is I like to see the geometry, so I'll turn it on, and this geometry is no good for sculpting. So what we want to do is we want to create a digital ball of clay. And the other thing we want to do is we want to work with symmetry. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hit X, and X is going to give us this kind of symmetry tool, and we have created our poly mesh already. But what we want to do is we want a backdrop that we can project our source material images on. So we're going to go into the floor icon here. We're going to turn on X and Z and turn off Y. So now it's turned on, and this is giving us two surface planes that we can see quite clearly. And now what I want to do is I want to go into Draw, and I want to select front back, map 1, import. So that's going to give us our front back, and the size isn't correct at the moment. We're going to adjust that. We're going to go back into Draw again, and then down here we're going to have left right, map 1, and we're going to go import, and then we're going to select the side view. Now what we can do is we can adjust to get ourselves a little bit more. We don't need it to be that big. So let's just scale it down a little bit. Looks about right. And then we're going to go and adjust the front back, map, scale. And that perspective isn't what I want, so I want to turn on dynamic perspective. It doesn't have to be precise. We're really just using this as reference. We don't even need to really realistically make it the same size as the ball of clay or relative to it. We're more using it as a visual aid. I just want to show you some cool aspects. If you can see that when I move my tool over the 3D sphere, on the surface of it, you can see it's translating the information. It's basically telling us where we are on the image. That can be quite handy if you're really trying to get things accurate to your source material. For this, we're not that concerned with it because we still are in very much a design and kind of sketching phase. So we are going to make some pretty significant changes, I think, to this model. You can see we have this beautiful plane in the background that gives us our source material. And if you're not happy with the color of your 3D sphere, hold down the control button and click W, and it'll just blast through a range of different colors. If you want to do something like that, or if you don't even want to look at the fill color, you can just turn off fill color here and it'll just give you a selected color you have for your matte cap. Let's just get to sculpting. So what we're going to want to do, because this mesh isn't really good, we want to make it as close to a clay ball as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on Dynamesh. We're going to go into Geometry, and under Geometry we have Dynamesh. We're going to turn that on, and as soon as we clicked on it, the geometry immediately fractured. Now what we have is more or less a very evenly distributed piece of geometry. So the tools I like to use for this, just basic tools at first, shaping tools, and we've got the move tool and the dam standard brush. So I like to use, when I'm first modeling, I like to use the move tool, the inflate tool, and the dam standard tool, just for roughing in at first. Morph the rough shape in, and then you're going to see how by using Dynamesh, you're coming very close to working with clay digital, and I absolutely love it. You can increase our brush size a little bit, and if you hold the Alt key down while you're using this move tool, it's going to push your geometry directly in. So no matter where you go, it's going to repeat everything on the other side. And now what you'll notice too is the geometry is starting to get blown out. And I'm not the greatest digital sculptor out there at all. Joseph Drust, if you follow any of his tutorials, I can leave a link in the description. He does amazing work. But if you notice, at a certain point, the geometry starts to get blown out, okay? And when it's getting blown out like that, it's not behaving correctly anymore. We're not getting that freedom of movement like we want when we're working with clay. So what you do is you hold down the control key, drag and release, and then because Dynamesh is on, it's immediately going to fracture the geometry back into that simplified geometry, or it's going into more detail. By Dynameshing, we're creating more geometry. I've kind of gotten ahead of myself now, but what I want to do is I want to keep my source material in line in the background, and then I want to turn off dynamic, and then I can kind of see what it is I'm doing here. Okay, now we've got our head more or less sorted out the way we wanted it, and there's no hair or mustache or anything like that, but I'm just giving you an example of where we want to be for designing the armature that's going to be underneath. I'm going to make an entire episode out of it, but just to explain to you why we do this digitally, it's for two reasons. One, for myself, it makes the design process easier. And number two, this is what we're going to use to make our molds and in the 3D printer and whatever maquettes we want to produce as well. So we have our model. We've got quite a bit of geometry here. It's quite complex. But the nice thing is now what we can do is we can go in and we can design the skull or the armature underneath. For this particular character, I want to work with silicone instead of plasticine. I want it to be a silicone puppet. I'm living in the South and I'm fighting a lot with the warm temperatures in summer with using plasticine. I really like the skin effects that you can get with silicone, and so this model is going to be completely made out of silicone. So what I'll do is I will append a sphere, and I will give it, change the scale of it. So the nice thing is you can get it underneath the skin, and then you can see through your model and shape the skull just like we were doing. I'm gonna go ahead and Dynamesh that. Okay, then we'll go back to our move tool, and then I can just push and nudge that skull around until I get it where I want it. And usually with this, I do two parts because I like to make an area for the eye sockets, of course. But this is purely for mechanical purposes. I mean, we can slice. There are all different methods for building something like this. So what I want to do is it doesn't have to be that complex underneath. I want to have an area in the skull that holds permanent magnets for maybe holding the mustache and the eyebrows in place. I'll get that just underneath the skin because I want it to be as kind of realistic as possible. So then you have all different types of slice tools and insert mesh tools. You can subtract shapes out of this however you want, and rather than sit here and go through it piece by piece, I'll just open up a previous example. Okay, here I have a skull already designed, and this is I'm pretty happy with this prototype. There are still some little things I want to work out, but I made it in basically three major parts, not including the jaw, because the jaw design, that's the area where I think I need to put a little bit more into it, and also I'm not happy with how my eye sockets came out, but like I said, this is all for another episode. I'll go into more and more detail, but what I want to show you is the just incredible level of detail you can get. And so these little registration points will line everything up once it comes out of the 3D printer. So now what I want to show you is how I'm laying out the skull and the figure for the 3D print. Okay, here we have the model and the skeleton and all the components in place for going to the 3D printer. And that is decimated geometry. So I'll just turn it on so you can have a look at it. And that, when you decimate, you're reducing the amount of geometry, so it makes the OBJ a little bit lighter for processing. I don't have the most powerful computer in the world, so this I'll take into the slicer software, and it will generate all the scaffold and stuff for holding on to the bed of my 3D printer. So that's it for this week. And once again, I apologize. I've been a little bit under the weather. I'm going to get back into the studio, and I'm going to produce a lot more videos of me just sculpting, showing you my process. I got a lot of questions about the sculpting and people wanting to see more of it. So that's it for this week. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week. Thank you.